we're known to be a nation of learners. Bnei Yisrael, Am Yisrael are a nation that learns. But what we don't often think enough about is that in order to be a nation of learners, we have to be a nation of teachers. And that's where the focus really is. And to understand that teaching in Torah is not just about enabling the next generation, that's one piece of it, but that teaching itself is a form of, and a very advanced form of learning. And we understand it, even in the Avodah, the bracha that we say every day, that lelamed, to teach, is part of the learning process. It's part of the way we understand the Torah. Is not only through the way we learn Torah, but also through the process of teaching. And we'll understand that there's something almost supernatural that is accessed by a teacher of Torah, and that one doesn't access when one is merely learning Torah. So teachers and angels, Alamut Ahavucha, Lamed Hey Amud Aleph and Amud Beis and Avodah Zarah. The sugya is based on a posuk referred to back in the Mishnah on Daf Chavtes, where the Mishnah brings the first psukim of Shir Hashirim, Yeshakenim Neshikot Piyuki Tovim Dodecha Miyayin, L'reach shmanecha tovim shemen turak shemecha, al kein alamot ahavucha. What does all that mean? The Gemara says on Daf Lamed Hey Amud Aleph, Maiki tovim dodecha miyayin. What does this mean that your love is better to me than wine? What is Shlomo HaMelech saying? Ki ata Rav Dimi Omar, Amra Knesset Yisrael lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu Ribono Shel Olam, Arevim alai divrei dodecha yoter miyeina shel Torah. I prefer what the Rabbonim have taught than the words of Torah itself. And this is a really important fundamental understanding of Torah and of a hashkafa in Torah. You so often hear from secular people or ignorant people, it's just the law of the rabbis. What the Torah says, that's like, it's the law of the rabbis. Shlomo HaMelech said if we had to choose, we would choose the Rabbanans over the Doraisas. If we had to choose, we would choose the Gemara over the Chumash. Tovim dodecha miyayin. If that means if we had to choose, the words of the Rabbonim would be greater for us than the words of the Torah. There are many aspects to that. The one Rabbi Yonah talks about in Sharei Tshuva and Sharei Shlishi, Ota Zayin, where he describes that in a law of the Rabbonim, quite apart from the fact that the Gezerah is holding us back from doing something wrong, so the example he gives are the laws of Yichud. So the laws of Yichud, of not being alone with a woman to whom one isn't married, is in order to protect us and her from a relationship which shouldn't be taking place in the first place. But it's more than that, explains Rabbi Yonah. And that is Takanat Chachamim v'gidrehem yesod l'derech hayira. The way you're mekayim the mitzvah of Yirat Shamayim is by keeping a d'Rabbanan. Yirat Shamayim means to fear Hashem. It means to be conscious and mindful of Hashem, not just to love Hashem, and Hashem is wonderful and Hashem is awesome and so on, but there's also a yira, meaning that I want to be really careful not to come close to doing anything that could be wrong. The same as if there's a dangerous electrical installation and there's a big sign that says, don't touch, don't come near it, dangerous, and you keep away from it. That's the kind of yira you want there to be, as well as all the other dimensions of relationship to Hashem, is a dimension of I don't want to come near to doing anything that is wrong. And we've once spoken about the difference between yirat shamayim and yirat chet, and what we're really talking about here is yirat chet. And the way you fulfill this idea of yirat shamayim is by being very careful about the d'Rabbanans, because they are in and of themselves yesod l'derech hayira ki yasu geder v'harchaka pen tiga yad adam b'yisur Torah, because they're training you into being careful not to come close to an isur doraisa. V'rav hazihirut v'hageder v'harchaka min ha'isur alo zeh mi'ikarei hamorah, and being careful not to come close to something which is also the fundamental principle of yira. And so he goes on. He says that's pshat in this Gemara over here, that the idea of Yirat Shamayim, which is one of the greatest mitzvahs in our relation to Hashem, comes through our acceptance of and dedication to the laws of the Rabbanan, and that's why they're so precious to us, because they bring us to Yirat Shamayim. So we need to understand also who these Rabbanan are, why they are, what it means to be the Rabbanan, not only in the time of the Gemara, but in our time too. That who these people are. So on Amud Beis we go further in the posuk. Let's go further into the pasuk. What does it mean? The smell, the fragrance of your oils are good. What is a Talmid Chacham like? Explains the Gemara. Like a fragrant oil. If you cover the fragrant oil up, you get no benefit from it. If you uncover it and you wave it around, then everybody gets the benefit from it. As we discussed previously, that the idea of smell is you're able to gain smell without detracting from the original item. Somebody else benefits. If you want to taste something, you've got to take from the original item, and there's less of the original item. If I've got a glass of wine and I want you to taste the wine, I've got to give you some of my wine. I have less wine. But with smell, it isn't so. With smell, you can have pleasure in the thing itself without in any way detracting from me. And so it is with Talmidei Chachamim, that when they disperse their Torah, when they teach, when they spread their Torah out, it has much more benefit without detracting from them, as we're going to see. V'lo od, not only that, says the Gemara, says Rav Chisda, ela dvarim shemechusim mimenu mitgalin lo. When Talmidei Chachamim go out and spread their Torah outward, things which were hidden, which were not accessible to him or to anybody, mitgalin lo. They become aware, they become available to him. Shnei Amar, as it says, Almot Ahavuk. Almot come from the word ne'elam. That those hidden principles which are not accessible, they love you and they attach themselves to you and they reveal themselves to you. Because you're spreading your Torah, you're not sitting and holding close onto your Torah. And Rashi says, Mitgalin mi'atzman belo torach kashu melamdam. When you're teaching Torah, these hidden depths of insight come to you without effort. Normally, there's a lot of effort in learning. I've said to you so many times that when I'm traveling and I try to do Matmonim from where I am, but you're not sitting in front of me, it's not the same. It's terribly hard. It's a lot of effort. There's an effortlessness that comes when you're teaching, particularly. It's interesting that I found it doesn't help that Baruch Hashem, there are people listening to it online. It seems that this is really teaching face to face, which has this ability to open insights to the teacher that wouldn't be available if he were learning on his own, certainly not below Torah, without an enormous amount of effort. So let's take this in a little further and understand the mechanism. How does this work? The Toras Chaim was a Rov in Belz, but it was 200 years before the Belzer Hasidim. So he wasn't a Belzer Rebbe, he was a Belzer Rov. He was the Rov of the town of Belz, and he wrote the Sefer Toras Chaim. He was a Talmud of the Mashal, we've quoted him before, and his father was a Talmud of the Ramah and a Rebbe of the Bach. So this is right at the center of the movement of Torah through the Shulchan Aruch to the time of the Achronim. The Toras Chaim is right in the middle of that time. And he writes on this Rashi, She'dekivan shemelamed b'torato la'achirim, since he's teaching from his Torah to others. Notice it's his Torah. We're not talking about a person who's teaching Aleph Beis, a person who's teaching Chumash, a person who's just teaching the text and transmitting what's already written, reading out of an art scroll and sharing it with a group of people. That's good, that's fine. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about melamed mitorato, his own chidushim, his own insights, his own understanding of Torah. He doesn't keep to himself, but he shares outward. The Talmidav mechasrim oto. He might think that his Talmidim are taking up his time. I could be learning another daf. I could be learning another Masechta. Instead, I'm teaching to people. Lekach chochmato v'torato novaat mikirbo. Therefore, his chochmah and Torah springs out from inside him. V'holech umitgaber tamid, and it keeps on growing and growing and growing. It's not, you think that if you're taking the time off to teach, you're depleting yourself. No, on the contrary, that stimulates you more and more, that more and more comes mikirbo, from inside you. Leidat alumot chochma yoter mitalmidav, to make sure that you know more than your Talmidim. It's the fear that, what's that syndrome called, when smart people think that they're going to be found out as knowing nothing? The imposter syndrome. Everybody has an imposter syndrome, including Talmidei Chachomim. What happens if my Talmud will ask me something I don't know the answer to? What happens if my Talmud has learned that Gemara already and he understands Pshat better than I do? It's a fear that if you don't have that fear, then you're not teaching Torah. It's a standard fear of anybody who teaches. Says the Toras Chaim, don't worry, there's a special siyata dishmaya. You'll always know a little bit more than your Talmud. Where would you know it from? Maybe your Talmud's learned more than you, maybe he's brighter than you. We have that right over here. We have Talmudim who know more than I do, who've learned more than I do. Where does that come from? It says there's a siyata dishmaya, that at the right time you'll have access to the knowledge you need in order to be able to share something with your Talmidim. Ki be'er mayim chayim shekol zman shedolim mimenu tamid holech umitgaber. Like a well of water, a spring of water, the more you draw from it, the more it produces. So to put yourself into a situation where your Talmidim are drawing from you doesn't deplete you. On the contrary, it refreshes you and it invigorates you in a way that you wouldn't otherwise be able to. And the Toras Chaim gets that from his Rebbe, from the Maharsha. The Maharsha goes into this piece in quite a lot of detail, but he says something particularly amazing. And he goes into this whole idea that you would think that there's a depletion of knowledge, of effort, of time, and it isn't so. And that that if you hold Torah to yourself and you don't share it, you don't get additional siyata dishmaya, you don't get additional wisdom. This is part of the learning process. Part of the way that you access deeper levels of Torah is through your sharing that Torah, through your learning of that Torah. But then he says an amazing thing. And he quotes from the time when Moshe went to Shamayim, and the Malachi Ashori said to him, there's a whole sugya in the Gemara that he brings, and it comes to a point where the Malachim themselves are teaching Moshe Torah. And the Maharsha says, Shemi shezacha v'zika et harabim kimidato shel Moshe Rabbeinu. If somebody is passionately committed to learning and teaching, to be mezakeh the rabbim, to be able to inspire others with his Torah. Again, we're not just talking about sharing information. That can be done on the internet. That can be done anywhere. You don't need a Rebbe for that. But to inspire people with what he's inspired by. He's discovered something. He's seen something. He has an insight in Torah. To take that and put it out there. Zoche gamhu she'af dvarim ha'mechusim mitgalin lo. He has a special schus, that he will understand things he's not capable of understanding. He will understand things beyond his pay grade. How does that happen? Says the Maharsha, Al Yedei Maloche Hashores. There are special angels that the Rebbeinu Shalom sends to teach him. That intimacy, and that's why in the learning of Torah, and more so in the teaching of Torah, and in the learning of Torah in order to teach Torah, there is a level of connection with the Rebbeinu Shalom that there isn't in anything else. That capacity that one can actually sit, and that there are Malachi Hashores, there are angels that interact with the learner who is learning in order to teach. Haloimed al manat lelamed. He's learning in order to teach, in order to clarify. There are angels that sit with him and that clarify for him and that open gates of insights into understandings that he would not be capable of otherwise. And I've once before quoted to you from the Akdama of the Machazeh Avrom. The Machazeh Avrom, it's about 150 years ago, and he wrote a sefer on the three Bovers. He has a haskoma of Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan. He has, later on when it was republished in the 1960s, Rabbi David Lapin writes an amazing haskoma for the republication, talks about what an amazing sefer it is. And he writes in his Hakdama, in his introduction, based on the Gemara in Bava Basra, "Ha'mechadesh eze chidush b'Torah she'einenu b'koach sichlo usvarat libo, rak b'hofa'at ruach mimarom." When a person is mechadesh, innovates an idea in Torah which is above his pay grade, he realizes, I don't even know where this comes from. Where did I get this from? It's so amazing. It's something he would not naturally have got to. Nikra zeh hachidush b'shem nevuah. That's called nevuah. And that's based on the Chassam Sofer, which we've also looked at before. And I've brought all this in the source sheet so that people can go through it and learn it. The Chassam Sofer at the end of Orach Chaim, where he talks about the Raavad in Hilchos Lulav and Esrog, where the Raavad says, many times in our Beis HaMedrash, there's been Ruach HaKodesh. And the Chassam Sofer explains that Ruach HaKodesh is a spectrum. The Ruach HaKodesh is not just what Moshe Rabbeinu had, or what Rabbi Akiva had. Ruach HaKodesh is a spectrum. It starts, of course, on the highest levels of Nevuah, and the lower ends of the spectrum is any situation where a Talmid Chochem is mechadish something above his pay grade. When he understands something that he isn't, not through his own effort, and one feels it all the time. Where does this come from? How did I get it? How did I come across this? How did I find this at the right time? It's not a matter of bekius. It's amazing siyata dishmaya. You feel it all the time. And when you're feeling that, that's already begeder. That's on the lower ends of Ruach HaKodesh, as the Chassam Sofer says. And the Chassam Sofer goes so far as to say that applies even with goyim. And he works it out from the Gemara in Bava Basra, that even when a goy does something way above his capacity. We've spoken before about the fact that Mozart created music at 5 years old that it's not possible for a 5-year-old to create that music. So where does it come from? Shakespeare, an ordinary person, has chokhmah, has such wisdom. Where does it come from? Says the Chassam Sofer that with a non-Jew as well, it's not something that's restricted to Jewish people. Sometimes he has a level of wisdom that is way above his capacity. And that's a form of siyata dishmaya that borders on Ruach HaKodesh. And so it is when one is able to learn, when the Gemara says, in this case, on the posuk of Alkein Alamot Ahivuchel, explains the Gemara that when a Talmid Chochem is not only sitting on his own learning for himself, but is finding ways to make his learning accessible. He's finding ways to discover things in Torah that are relevant for this time, to discover things in Torah that are relevant for this generation, and to share those things and make them accessible and make them available. That process of learning Torah in order to reveal its relevance and make its relevance accessible to people, that process is the highest process of learning, a process where one isn't only learning on one's own, but one is learning in partnership with Malachei Hashem, the forces in the world that Hashem gives us, angelic forces, so to say, that the teacher has access to, that creates a level of intimacy with Hashem and with his Torah that otherwise wouldn't be accessible.